Hey, thank you much. Wow. All right. Blew that right away. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. We are, of course, talking about the work that you did on Orphan First Kill. First of all, really rad movie. I liked it a lot. I actually watched it for the second time to do my review
Wow.
to prep for this. And I have to say, what I was kind of struck by was it kind of has like this soft, sort of dreamlike feel.
Mhm. Mhm.
I guess that's something that was sort of like the director's vision, or like he wanted something that felt a little bit like dreamlike.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, basically, the Orphan First Kill is a very, very, very heavily diffused movie. I mean, we probably haven't seen a modern movie that uses that much diffusion in it since, like the 80s, like the 70s and 80s. It was really a common sort of look for a lot of our favorite 70s genre pictures and some of the 80s pictures, more so towards the beginning of the 80s. The diffusion sort of laid off a little bit as the 80s went on, but it was definitely a huge 70s thing, for example. So we were faced with a couple of challenges on Orphan First Kill, of course. So the diffusion is also, it's an artistic choice, but it's also partially a functional choice. Because when I signed on to the movie, I just read it as a script and imagined, like, probably most of the people involved with the production at that point, that they're just going to hire another child performer to play the role of Esther. And so I had a certain sort of visual approach in mind, but then it was the director, William Brent Bell's idea and passion to have Isabelle Fuhrman play the part of Esther. And of course, Isabelle Fuhrman is an amazing performer, and she created the role. So, certainly from a theoretical standpoint, that's absolutely what it should be. It would be sort of like asking, let's make a Nightmare on Elm Street movie without Robert Englund. Well, they tried it, and that didn't really quite work out. So even though there was that incredibly, almost mind-boggling challenge involved, the director Brent Bell was very insistent on using Isabelle throughout the process. So a part of that would mean that he wanted to do the majority of the work practically, which is a huge challenge trying to make at the time a 23-year-old adult look like a child who's actually older in
Yeah.
reality in the truth story than she actually was when she made the movie. So I think actually if you look at Orphan First Kill, the way Isabelle looks in Orphan First Kill, it's probably closer to what the character actually should have looked like in the first movie.
Mhm.
Because artistically, like I love the first Orphan. I think it's a brilliant film. But as it goes on, suddenly when they make the switch of she's actually an adult, she shows up and she literally looks like a monster, like literally nothing narratively has changed to make her look like a monster other than she took her teeth out. So, but suddenly towards the ending, then, she looks like a fiend. So in this one, she looks probably closer to what the character may have actually looked like. But, that's all theory. So a part of the diffused dreamy look had to be because they wanted to make her skin look as soft as possible, to make her, without resorting to a lot of CGI, make her look as young as you can. So, and you use old school tricks. So we used all forced perspective and things like that. It was really complicated to do. Particularly, it's a much smaller movie than the first movie in terms of the means we were given. So we had to sort of walk and chew gum quite a bit. But yeah, the diffuse thing began with just having to make Isabelle look younger. So diffusion helps that. Then afterwards, we're looking at movies like Don't Look Now, pictures like that from the 70s, pictures we all love that used really heavy diffusion. And we thought that would just be the aesthetic of the movie overall to not only differentiate it, but to help technically with what we had to accomplish with Isabelle. So the super diffused soft look, which sometimes is used ironically in the movie too. Like we're well aware that the movie's sort of taking the piss out of the American white bourgeoisie aristocracy. So on some of the dinner scenes, like the diffusion is pretty heavy there to almost make fun of these old traditional old home family dinners in rich families, so the movie is quite tongue-in-cheek in many ways. So we tried to put the visuals, like play little tricks with the visuals of that as well with it. So it was all quite thought out in that way. And also a lot of the softness comes from the lenses we used, which they're all lenses from the 1970s for the most part. There's a couple of more modern lenses, but particularly one zoom lens that I have, which is the original Ingenue 25 to 250 zoom lens from 1970, that we used again on the modern movie. And that for a lot of the long lens stuff, filming through trees, fences, things like that, where it just sort of feels like there's a lot of blurry foreground elements. Those are the actual lenses they used in the 70s, with diffusion added on top of that to give it this sort of like dreamy, strange feeling. It's definitely a look that contrasts with the very harsh, sharp, ultra digital look that a lot of, for example, Netflix productions have and things like that. We wanted to have it feel more cinematic and more filmic in that way.
Yeah, no, that definitely comes across. I do love, when I take notes, I definitely was thinking about how it does look very old school. I did like the diffused look because not being like an expert on that kind of stuff, I'm just thinking like, oh, okay, it's like really soft. It looks a little bit like I don't mean this in a bad term, but almost like a Lifetime movie kind of
Mm-hmm.
like where it's but again, I think as you say, it's much more, it's a horror and a satire, so
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it really works in that way. um there was a really interesting scene that I liked visually, which is where Esther's practicing saying mummy in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a particularly difficult shot, like when you're working with a mirror but you don't obviously want all of your, all the crew and everything in the background?
Well, in general, when I work with a lot of mirrors, and sometimes mirrors used in manners that you don't actually see that it's a mirror in the film. Like sometimes to make a room look larger, what you can do is you can put a mirror in a corner of the room, put the camera in a tight spot, and film through the mirror to actually make the room look larger in a sense that you can get a wider shot where the mirror is placed. The mirror is obviously much thinner than a camera operator, all the film gear and everything. So you film into a mirror to make it bigger. It's old school camera techniques. I mean, one of my favorite movies is um, um, Angst from 1983, if you've seen that movie, and that's shot by
Yeah.
Zbigniew Rybczynski. So that movie is shot entirely through mirrors, for various technical reasons. So that is a huge inspiration for me and throughout cinematography. And I always like prefer to do everything very practical. Uh, I took a cue from that and learned the tricks they did in Angst, to see how to apply to modern filmmaking and modern cinematography. And I do it constantly, like even in the last movie, Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool, the first shot is actually shot in a mirror. You don't know it is. But to make the movie, the room that it takes place in look bigger, we have to shoot in a mirror, hide it just down in the corner. This is just a question of angles, right? And you just position just so. It's very rare. If you ever see a character looking directly into a mirror in a modern film today, there's two ways of doing it. They're filming through if you're dead on looking into the mirror, you're either filming through a double-sided mirror behind them, which I did quite a bit of in a movie called Parallel, for example. I did that trick quite a bit, and we actually did that trick in Orphan First Kill. In the last shot of Orphan First Kill, which is, I don't want to spoil it for audiences who haven't seen it, but the last shot is done through a double-sided mirror to create a multiple reflection image repetition of the character. And that's a pretty intricate, complex shot, the last shot in the movie. Everything's practical in that shot. In terms of the camera tricks, they did a little CG on her face, but it's all just moving in, to have multiple Esthers grow into one as the camera descends, and that's all done with mirrors. So particularly in the psychiatrist's office, everything is mirror tricks done through double-sided mirrors. getting multiple reflections from one into the other with the production designer, Matthew Davies, who's amazing, incredibly talented designer. We worked out these sort of mirror tricks throughout, and he likes to use a lot of mirrors and reflections too in his designs. I worked with him previously before on a TV show, and I knew the kinds of sets he was going to be doing, and was very pleased to have fun with them on the movie. So the mirrors are a part of, also the metaphors within it. She's hiding. There's a double person hidden inside of it. Like the metaphor is there.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because like, I'm obviously like I have, the world of like photography and like trick photography that's like completely like alien to me. Like I can appreciate it for sure, but it's so amazing to hear like how these like tricks are done like so seamlessly.
Cool.
The other thing is was the stuff with the black light, was that pretty difficult? Like do you have to have like special lenses to maybe like capture that better than like other lenses? I don't know how that.
No, I mean, actually, blacklight is pretty much, well, as you see it when you're photographing it. I mean, in the old days on film, this was shot on the Arri Alexa Mini LF. So it was shot in large format on a very modern new Arri camera, digital camera. But back in the old days, when you would try to take an incandescent light meter reading when you're shooting in blacklight, like the ultraviolet light, the light meter couldn't read it. So you would have to use a spot meter and read off of the reflection off of what was going over there to try to figure out your exposure, how you're going to do it. On digital, it's a lot easier because you see directly what you get. So that helps the process. I think sometimes the digital sensors have a bit of trouble with that kind of color spectrum. It's a pretty tough color spectrum for a digital sensor to capture, but I think the Arri sensor did it just fine. And it's all practical, like everything's done live. Like it was all done with blacklight paint, done with the black lights on it. What you see practically turning off and on in the movie was there on set. There was no trickery with that. And we augmented some of the deeper stuff because blacklight actually, it's not that bright. So we augmented stuff with kind of purple tinged LEDs in the background where it didn't have to hit phosphorescent paint or anything like that, just to make it look like it was going deeper and larger. So it was a combination of different tricks of using actual, black lights with more just like purple regular lighting that simulates the look of a black light, but doesn't necessarily do the effect for deep in the background when it didn't have to perform with the phosphorescent paint.
Huh. Wow. Again, that's so interesting because, when I see stuff like that, I'm often curious, like, is that a pain in the ass? Like, is that hard to do? Like, because I think when y'all are doing your job so well, it looks so seamless and streamlined. You never really see all the headaches that go into even just setting up a shot takes like hours.
Well, I mean, it depends on the shot. If setting up one shot takes hours, then you probably won't be there the day afterwards to continue to work. I mean, yeah. It's you got to go fast, particularly on a movie like Orphan First Kill, where it's a low budget horror movie, right? So not tiny budget, but not we didn't have the means of the first movie, for example, which was made in a completely different era of film financing and also film techniques in many ways. So, you got to move fast. And particularly, you would think, okay, we're using Isabelle Fuhrman, so she's an adult. So, children, when you work with children, you have very limited schedules that you can have them operate. So, as anybody who's seen Orphan First Kill will know, and the movie doesn't try to hide it too much, and that's a part of the fun of Orphan First Kill, actually. I mean, there's two ways of playing a movie like that. It's either it's all CG and you have a bot essentially with a head superimposed on it for the whole thing, which could look kind of freakish and weird in a very digital way, and not a very organic way for the entire movie, that could take people out of the movie and make them criticize it. Or you can do it in the way we did it, where it's mostly practical, where in the close-ups, all old school techniques and things, it's Isabelle. And in the wide shots, you use a child, which is what was the decision to be done on Orphan First Kill after a bunch of people talked about it. Now, of course, that isn't perfect. And, sometimes in the close-ups, yeah, it could look a little bit different than it does in the wide shots, but I think it's sort of like watching The Irishman, for example. When you go into The Irishman in the first 5 minutes with all the very extreme digital de-aging on these amazing performers, you're like, all right, I want to enjoy this movie. So in the first 5 minutes, once I'm used to what's going on, it's either you get on board or you don't. And I think Orphan First Kill is very much that kind of movie. It's like, if you can get on board and have fun with it and also have fun with the fact we did everything kind of practically, I think the movie can be very entertaining for you. If you're like, man, she doesn't always look, like a 10-year-old, well, then of course you're not gonna enjoy the movie. And I think for this movie to work for audiences, you have to just go with the flow and enjoy it, and then you can have a good time with it. And that was something that we were very aware of when we approached it, and sort of planned everything out. And again, the Lifetime movie thing that you mentioned was a very intentional joke in the movie, particularly for the dinner scenes. Like for the dinner scenes, we were like, let's take the piss out of the American family dinner. And that was very much a part of that look. But a lot of it harkens back to before these Lifetime movies, where if you really look at a lot of 70s diffused movies, it's really closer to that aesthetic of like a Don't Look Now or something like that. Also, it's an 80s movie, but White of the Eye, Donald Cammell's White of the Eye was a big influence on us. And that movie is a insanely diffused movie. Like, even the DPs, there's 2 DPs on that movie. They said like, maybe we went too far. And hey, sometimes I look at Orphan First Kill and I'm like, oh shit, go too far. But because it's by far the most diffused movie I've ever done in my life, and probably will be the most diffused movie I will ever do. But at the same time, I think it works for that movie. It gives that movie its own personality and so many things, particularly with the Netflix sort of restraints that they put when you put out a movie. You have to grade everything in Dolby Vision. It all has to be done in a certain way. Like a lot of the stuff looks the same. So we wanted to have something that looked different.
Yeah, and then it's interesting when you talk about like speed, because like you've obviously like cut your teeth in like indie low budget like filmmaking, where you have to, as you say, like keep going, time is money, all that stuff. Do you like the kind of room like bigger budget stuff gives you, or do you kind of thrive on that like fast pace? Like I know you've done a number of television as well, so that's probably even quicker. So do you like that fast pace, or do you like to have the room to take a little bit more time?
I think it depends of the movie, and it depends of everything. I could certainly walk and chew gum and go at that fast pace. I mean, Orphan wasn't a tiny movie. Orphan First Kill, it wasn't like a tiny movie. Just compared to the budget that they had on the first one, it's not as much as that, but it was still like for a prequel to a thing, like the budget was still okay. We got to build sets. It was fine. It wasn't tiny. So we had like 35 days to shoot that. So that was still pretty good. But 35 days with COVID, when COVID was new, it was shot in fall, winter 2020, when productions were just allowed to start up again. So the protocols were way strict, and it was before any vaccines or anything. So there was the fear of, if you get this, you could actually become very gravely ill, kind of thing. So that took a little extra time. Shooting with the actual minors, since they have to work on a very limited amount of time on set. We had 2 kids who were Esther doubles. intercut with Isabelle, who is only really in close-ups, the occasional wide shot when we can trick the forced perspective enough to make it work. But most of Isabelle's performance is from, the waist up in that movie. And if it's, in a wide shot from afar, that's one of the child doubles. Yes, you can tell, but that's half the fun. And like you gotta enjoy the sort of like irony of the movie, because it's a very cynical movie, even towards itself. So then as you go along with that kind of thing, the time becomes still, you think 35 days for an indie movie is okay. It wasn't really an indie movie. It was really a studio picture, but a small studio picture. And but still, when you put all those factors in, it still was tight some days. And some days I had to take out all the low budget tricks to make the days. We made every day, everything was done on time, budget, and all that, which is something that's important to me. I believe if you plan your artistic approach well enough, the efficiency can run boom like clockwork. When you hit the floor, you just have to plan the things out accordingly, and also know how to react and how to really move when things change, because things change all the time, and still make it good. And a part of still making it good is to figure out a very concise mise-en-scène philosophy in prep, a really concise philosophy towards how the photography will be done, how the lighting will be done, what is the look of the movie. Then once you have that figured out, when you have to improvise on set because something happens, a car tire blows, or whatever you name, whatever situation can happen on set, then you can react quickly, but still have it make sense within the context of the movie, to not make it feel like a compromise. As long as you have a proper directorial philosophy figured out for the movie, then a visual philosophy for the movie, then you can do whatever and just sort of have to react as you do. So I like them both. I think there's a certain minimum budget threshold I could work at these days, just because I have a certain way of working that costs X amount of money that I've developed throughout the years. I have a very specific way of exposing images that not everybody does. I use something called a cine fade, which is a variable neutral density filter for exposure, general exposure. On most shots, I can use it. I really like to use a camera operator or camera operators when I'm using multiple cameras, particularly on Orphan First Kill. Yuan Malnati, my regular camera operator, who's also like the best Steadicam operator I've ever worked with, and also a great friend, and also a huge horror fan. I insist as much as possible to have him with me. I don't really operate the camera anymore, so that's something that costs a certain amount of money, and only a certain size of movie can afford. So I have a minimum I can work at these days, or like to work at these days. Of course, you can do anything if faced with it, but like I think both have their pros and cons. Like huge movies with everything, sometimes that just moving the stuff from point A to Z can slow you down. Then obviously, on larger movies, there's a lot more politics involved and a lot more steps to go through, which is a different sort of game than the small stuff. You might have more freedom, but then, like sometimes you're like, well, where's even the toilet? And I don't know, like things like that, you kind of get too old to want to have to think about, So both have their pros and cons.
Nice. And it must also really help that you made films yourself, so know that process very intimately. So even though you're not directing, you kind of know all the pieces that need to be put into place. I am a big fan of your I know you didn't direct a lot of movies, but the stuff that you did, I thought was amazing. Like I kind of love obviously you did like a segment in Theater Bazaar, which I'm a huge fan of. So I think it's like definitely one of my favorite segments. And that just got a really awesome Blu-ray release not too long ago. So that must have been really cool. Did you rewatch it anytime recently? And indeed, do you rewatch any of your older films that you directed?
The ones that are directed as little as humanly possible, I would say. I look at them. Look, I mean, I don't direct anymore, and I don't want to direct anymore. That's it. Theater Bazaar was it for me. I am something that I think is an advantage to directors who wish to work with me as a cinematographer, in the sense that I have directed and I'm not a frustrated director like a lot of cinematographers are. I do not want to do it again. I have done it. And so I learned a lot in doing so, so I can help the directors when, say, for example, they want some opinions or help on certain directorial matters. But I also understand the respect for the director's position and how to protect the director as much as possible, which is really my passion. When I go out on a picture, I'm all about working with the director and making sure their vision gets across on the screen, and also to propose stuff to help inspire them on maybe some stuff that they wouldn't have thought of to help the movie feel even better, to them. Of course, everything goes through their sort of approval process. It's like I'm sort of like a lot of hot water and a whole bunch of tea, but what comes out of the sea is their decision, and I respect that completely. I'll never fight a director. It's like, for example, Orphan First Kill, the director William Brent Bell is like, let's use Isabelle Fuhrman, 23-year-old, and have her play this supposed child. Well, I mean, if that's what the director wants, I'll do my best to get that for the director. Of course, there's physical limits within what can be done, but we'll do our best, and I go with it. I go with the director's vision. So I think Theater Bazaar, I love the movie. I'm very happy with it and everything. And I looked at it again for the new Blu-ray release. I think we did a new audio commentary on it, if I'm not mistaken. I think we did. Yeah, I think we did that. And David Gregory, of course, is Severn, is a huge friend, and we're all, friends. So yeah, I mean, I think probably the best thing I directed is probably that episode of Theater Bazaar. And that's probably enough. Yeah, for the directing part. The rest of it, I mean, cinematography, I really like collaboration. I like collaborating with people. So collaborating with directors is what really inspires me, more so than just being on my own and having to, do everything alone. It was very lonely, directing, but also doing the cinematography, doing everything like that. It wasn't so exciting for me. So I'm more happy collaborating with people, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And if you needed like a swan song for directing, that's a hell of a good, great one even. So not too bad. Yeah. So like, besides your own, like, what's your favorite segment on that? Do you have one that you
I really like, I think Buddy's segment is really good. I really love David Gregory's segment, Sweets, on there. I think Sweets is phenomenal. I think it really works great. But, I mean, it's sort of like, I think overall the movie works, and it's not the kind of thing that, like some people say the accident is, like doesn't fit. I think the accident is good. It works within there. The Richard Stanley episode, it's like, feels almost like Tales from the Crypt kind of thing. Is different, but they're all different. And I just love the movie overall. I do think David Gregory's a great director and should make more movies as a director. I think everything he's done as a director I really like, and I think he's a huge talent, but also I love what he does for Severn. So
yeah. I know we were talking a little bit off air, but I have my little buddy here that,
yeah, there he is,
for better or worse, watches over me. So yeah, no, Severn's great. Like I have a whole entire wall of movies from them. So
yeah. I mean, they're all great though. That's the thing. Like all the new Blu-ray labels and indie labels, they're all phenomenal. Vinegar Syndrome, Arrow, Synapse, you name it, they're great. So I'm a huge fan of everything that comes out on physical media, all the wonderful remasters and all these things, Shout Factory, so many great things. are coming out. It's stuff that when I was a kid, I never would have dreamed I would have been able to see these films at this quality. Like this is an office, this is a tiny projector, but I have a proper projector set up and everything where it looks better than 35 mil prints would have looked, just projecting a Blu-ray. So it's like having your own cinema. It's the dream of every child when you're, growing up and learning this stuff and going to cinemas, like, has your own, and you can have this huge library where the quality of a 35 millimeter print is something that can fit in your hand. It's phenomenal. It's one of the fun things about living in the future.
Right. One of the few good things about living in modern times, I think. Like just the other day, they officially announced Street Trash in 4K, and I'm like that's one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should mention Street Trash because Street Trash with Johan Malnati, my Steadicam / camera operator, that's one of his favorite movies, and that's one of the movies that made him want to do Steadicam, because Street Trash is many things. I love Street Trash, but it's also a great ode to the Steadicam. It was directed by a Steadicam operator who's now a DP and has gone back to directing TV, but he doesn't really direct theatrical features, and but still some of the most amazing Steadicam shots in there. I mean, our biggest Steadicam movie influences are Street Trash, Opera, and What of the Eye. All like just totally amazing, insane Steadicam films. So that's why we use a lot of Steadicam in our movies. Is just like that aesthetic is something that really formed us. And Orphan First Kill has some pretty elaborate Steadicam shots in it too. Not all of them made the final cut. The most insane Steadicam shots in Orphan First Kill, you actually didn't make the cut. But there are some like crazy things we did that were really elaborate. That just they always cut up those shots. What are you going to do? But there was one good one in Orphan for the escape of Lena at the time. She's called Lena from the mental institution. That's all like a couple of shots stitched together, but it's meant to look like one. And that was still pretty elaborate Steadicam work from Johan over there.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I noted in my review, that it's such a visually stunning looking movie, and the way you shot it was really great. And as I said, it does have this kind of like uncanny valley, but not like in a bad way kind of vibe. It definitely you get across that dreamy sort of feel, which I think really works. And again, it's so interesting because you were talking about how it works in context of the satire. And now I think if I would watch it again, I would get that extra kind of layer, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, what's strange about Orphan First Kill is, yes, prequel to Orphan and all these things. But I mean, when I read the script, I was thinking it almost read more like a Claude Chabrol movie. In a sense that it's about a bourgeois satire, the dreams of a bourgeois family, and always trying to go to extremes, even post-murder, to maintain that facade of respectability. That's a part of the inner metaphor within the script of Orphan First Kill. So, it's more like a joke on the extremes that these very rich families will go to maintain their reputation. That's really what the movie's about when you go to it. So it almost feels like a Claude Chabrol movie in that way, which is frequently many of his films are about the French bourgeoisie, aristocracy, kind of Hitchcockian, murder occasionally thrown in there. So when I read it, it felt like Chabrol-y, which is exciting to me. I love Claude Chabrol. Even though, you watch the movie and you're like, oh no, it's Orphan First Kill. It's not a Claude Chabrol movie, but it's still.
No, but I totally get that though. That definitely, I think that's a very apt comparison, really. And like I'm like definitely somebody that like I love like the whole spectrum of like movies like horror in any genre. I mean, give me something highbrow, give me something trashy, give me something with a little bit of highbrow and trash.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess Orphan First Kill maybe has that. And it also has, just a very radical conceit with taking Isabelle Fuhrman and to have her, play that part. I mean, it was really elaborate. If you looked at the exterior of the sets, how the sets actually looked to your eye when you showed up, you'd think everybody has gone insane. Like all of the other performers around Isabelle are wearing huge platform boots this high.
Wow.
She's mostly squatting for most of it. Every table she had to go through had to be lifted on multiple apple boxes. Foreground things like wine bottles for the wide shot. When it's the child, you had a smaller wine bottle with the same label on it. For the close-ups, when it's her, you had a larger wine bottle with the same label on it. This is all these real old school forced perspective techniques. And forced perspective is funny because, it's as simple as, say if somebody was sitting on this sofa behind me, they would just be sitting lower on it. And then suddenly, oh, it's a child. And I look huge because I'm closer to the lens with the wide lens. It's every shot was like a special effect shot. So I would say, I wouldn't, because towards the end of it, there were so many shots, we couldn't take hours to set up every shot. We had to take, like 20 minutes max to set up the shot. So by the time, they had so many apple boxes handy, the grips and the set decoration people, they were just like, they were ready, they're like, all right, okay, make it big, take it out, it's the kid, things like that. So we came up with a routine, but we had to try stuff. Like they even had like the special effects department built this weird sort of wheelchair rig where Isabelle could be pushed along lower and sort of move as if she's walking. That didn't work. That lasted a day. And then we saw that actually worked best was Isabelle just sort of squatting and walking, like just with a kind of squat walk, which in the end, the producers called the Esther stride. Me being a fan of Blue Velvet, I called it the duck walk, but that didn't work out. The producer's like, it's the stride. I'm like, okay, man, it's the stride. So sure.
So I guess so you must have sometimes like with situations like that, like an almost out of body thing where it's just like, wow, this is so surreal. This is so weird that
it was more stressful. I would say Orphan was not like, it was a lot of pressure to try and pull off basically something that is, not entirely following the rules of physics, So it was a complicated thing. It was like every shot was like, does she look young? Does she look young? And then you had like an army of people looking at the monitor to sign off on whether or not they did, which is fine. And that's a part of the process. And it should be that way because it shouldn't just be one person saying, I think that, on something like that. Like, I'm glad that the producers who were very good on this movie, the producers were great. And they were very, like conscientious to look. And also because it was COVID, they fed the signal out from the cameras to, I don't know how many producers who in LA and whatever the movie was shot in Winnipeg in Canada, because of COVID, they couldn't physically be there. So they would just open their laptops and just see the live feed from the shoot on their laptops. So occasionally we would get notes from who knows who from where that would come in. And Alex Mace was not only the person who came up with the story of the movie and came up with the story of the first Orphan, but he was the main like creative producer on set there. So everything had to go through Alex as well. And, I love Alex. He's great. And we got along fine, with that collaboration. It was fine. So, it wasn't just sort of like the kind of movie where you do whatever you wanted. Right. It was really like everything went through a process of approvals,
Yeah. And as you say, like that's, it's, good to have that kind of extra feedback because you don't want something that's like, it's my way and that's it. And, for better or worse, some usually worse when you have things like that. Like there's so many times that I'll I'll watch a movie that's like, the guy thinks he's an auteur and I'm like, maybe you should have had some input.
It depends, right? Some movies like that, but I think all the best auteurs I've worked with take input from everybody. Like Brandon Cronenberg, for example, is super collaborative. I mean, he's, easily one of the strongest auteur directors I've worked with and also just a great human being and friend. but he is very collaborative, listens to people, and he's not somebody who fights, but ultimately he takes the decision. And that's what I think what the best directors do is they listen to the input, but ultimately they, like there's hills they're willing to die on, and other ones they're willing to sort of massage things to a point where everybody could sort of agree on it. But I mean, like a director like Brandon, for example, he's just absolutely brilliant, and really has a way of making the set super cool, very collaborative and everything, but still having a very distinctive personal vision on screen, which is a huge accomplishment. And that's all to his credit, not only as a director, absolutely brilliant director, if you ask me, but also just as a great friend and human being. He's just one of those rare, amazing people you can meet in your life.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's really interesting because it's like when I think of like an auteur, I think of like, well, I mean, like Hitchcock comes to mind, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but like people that you think wouldn't take input, but it's so refreshing to hear that the best ones do allow that kind of collaboration. But ultimately, as you say, it's their vision. But I like how, they are willing to kind of hear a different approach to something, which I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So kind of wrapping up, you kind of talked a little bit. I know you can't say too much, but you are in post-production on the new Brandon Cronenberg movie.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like I said, I know you can't say a lot, but can you give us a little bit of a tease of what that's about?
Well, what I can say is it's called Infinity Pool, and we're in the final stages of post on it. So it's really just the final bells and whistles on it. I love the film. I think hopefully, I mean, you never know how a movie is going to be received. I will say that if you thought Possessor was nuts and pretty out there and crazy, this one I think is more
Oh
so.
wow.
I would say in many ways more extreme than Possessor. In some ways, it's a much bigger movie. It's a much different movie. It doesn't follow the same playbook that Possessor follows, so it shows a director growing and doing something quite different. It's certainly a much huger canvas to play on, and quite a very specific and again very humoristic and very ironic science fiction concept behind it. Sci-fi horror. It's definitely graphic. It doesn't skimp on the go for it. It really is quite an out there movie. I'm super happy with it. I hope audiences will dig it. It's maybe a more challenging movie than Possessor in certain ways. But again, I don't know. I mean, you never know how a movie will be received. It's all up in the air. But that one we're in the process of finishing, and I can't say when it's going to come out, but we know when it will come out. It won't be right away.
Nice. That sounds amazing. Now, real quick. So we were talking about collaborations, and obviously, his dad is David Cronenberg, one of my all-time favorite filmmakers. Was he ever on set? Did he ever like? No. Okay.
No, I mean David's wonderful. He's a great person and really supportive of our movies and like definitely a wonderful presence to be there. But he doesn't come on set and the movies are made very separately. Like Crimes of the Future was done right before we started shooting Infinity Pool. So some of our crew that, for example, we would have had on Infinity Pool, they were on Crimes. And so they worked with David on that one instead. But it's I think the Cronenbergs are brilliant. I loved Crimes of the Future. I thought it was great, I hope David makes many more films. But the movies are made very separately, and David doesn't he doesn't come on set or anything like that. Brandon is his own director and does his
Yeah.
own thing.
Yeah, and it's I wanted to try to like be really careful how to ask that, because it's not that I don't think that he has his own kind of thing, but I was kind of curious since, David has obviously had decades of experience, if he ever had any little input or anything. But yeah, that
yeah, I mean, obviously, as a father and son would talk about things. I mean, they talk definitely. They talk about stuff, but he's never there when we shoot or anything. Like,
yeah.
he doesn't need to be. He's not involved with the movies, So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that sounds really amazing. This is so cool that I feel like we've known each other for a while, but this is kind of the first time we've actually got to like talk and like have a formal interview. So this is I was really excited about this.
Cool.
Because it's so funny, because like I was like checking your IMDb just to refresh myself, and I'm like, oh man, like awesome movie, love it, classic. Like that you've worked on in some capacity, like just pretty amazing. Like I know nobody wants to kind of pick favorites, but has there been one filmmaker that you worked with that maybe you had the best experience with, or like you work with so many hugely talented people?
Well, yeah, one doesn't want to, signal that they're all your children, right? So you don't want to say, I like this kid better than the other one. No, I mean, I think in terms of satisfaction of the end product and the overall collaboration, obviously with Brandon Cronenberg, we have, a special bond, and it works great with him. But I mean, tons of great directors I've worked with have just been wonderful, and usually it goes great with directors, and I don't want to signal out anything other than the obvious one, because Brandon's work and we're so closely associated together. That one is a no-brainer, but the other ones, I mean, all I could say is in general, I have great experiences working with all the other directors I work with, and love them all.
Yeah, and I'm sure that each one is kind of unique and kind of satisfies some different creative itch, than apart from like another director. So I mean, because I try to get into the old habit of like asking somebody like what's their favorite movie that they've done. Like, it's like you said, it's like picking your one of your kids. Although I think if I had kids, I'd probably definitely have a favorite, and I would make sure that they would know that.
Yeah, that really tends to work out well with families, I hear. I hear the other kids are really like fans of that.
Well, listen, you pit them against each other, and then you see who wins your affection. I feel like that's pretty cool.
Give it a shot, man. History's proven that one works out. But yeah,
again, this was so awesome talking, and I really appreciate you taking the time to inform me about some of the really cool techniques that you did in Orphan First Kill. And that movie comes out on the 19th.
Yes, correct. August 19th on Paramount Plus in select theaters and digital.
And definitely check it out. I've seen it twice. I'll probably watch it again when it starts streaming. Cool. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right, take care, everyone.